Welcome guys, Andrew here. Now that some of the rest of the team is here with me in Nova Scotia, Canada, and the prototype is here with us, I thought we would also unbox it for you. So without further ado, let's take a look at the prototype for Bloodwork. I'm going to move this out of view and then just pull in each piece as we quickly talk about them. First, let's take a look at just a small selection of acrylic cubes that are 8mm. The acrylic cubes are useful for tracking health. Usually you typically use a red, blue, yellow, orange are all also representations of the different types of power that each mercenary generate. We also use an acrylic cube on a single slot in the Mercenary Dashboard for when you've chosen to use your gambit to make a free move action up to your speed value as a tactical repositioning that mercenaries can do once per mission. And then if you have in your mission setup like a red goblin wrecker and a red goblin sticker, a blue of each of those, a yellow of each of those, you would grab your rings and then on their dashboards set up the health for the red grunts like that, the blue based grunts like that, and the yellow based grunts like that, for example. And then at a glance, you know, oh yeah, we did 6 damage to the goblin wrecker that had the red base, and his health goes down by 6. These are the individual portraits that at a glance identify the different mercenaries that you can field in Bloodwork. And they feature, of course, Igor's unique, beautiful artwork. Saren has 16 health, 4 defense, 3 speed, which reflects 3 movement per turn or per move action. Saren's name is listed next, as well as her race and her class. And then it lists the armor type that she is attuned to wearing. And then there's, following that in the same sentence, typically some unique attribute or ability to that particular mercenary. Below that, you'll see what type of power their class uses. So in this case, focus, and then how focus is generated and how focus is lost. Below this, you'll see a row of your attributes, both primary and secondary. Primary attributes are denoted by red iconography, and they're different for each class type. And then below that, you see a grid under each type of attribute. And this is where you allocate your attribute points that you gain throughout the narrative campaign. And when a peg goes beyond one of these icons, that is a permanent improvement to your mercenary. So for example, this symbol here, which looks like a medic health symbol, would add 3 health to your base health at the start of every mission. There is a really great reference sheet as to what all of these icons mean at a glance that we'll show you later. Next, let's take a peek at grunt dashboards and health tracks, of which we have a whole bunch here in the prototype, and just assemble that for you and see what that looks like. So you can, let's say you have 3 goblin wreckers in a particular mission. You quickly just add 2 health tracks to the right of the grunt dashboard. And let's say you have 3 of those and they have 12 HP. You take your matching acrylic cubes, and for each ring base of similar color, you then slot in a health track so that you know the goblin wrecker in orange is at 12 health at the beginning of the mission, the blue goblin wrecker is at 12, the red goblin wrecker is at 12, and when you inflict damage to one or the other during combat, you very quickly just move the appropriate die, and it's modular. You just put out as many as you need without taking up significant extra table space. There's also a slot within the dashboard for the grunt profile card, which lists everything about them. There's a slot for their dynamic defense die, which gets rolled at the beginning of every round, and the value here is added to their base defense value on their profile card. And so every round they will have fluctuations in their defense value. Sometimes they're better prepared and have higher defense, and other times they have lower defense. The field is muddy. In one moment your footing may be better than at another. And so, your preparation to take a blow changes, and so too does their defense. And it forces you to constantly reevaluate your plan during the mission. So it's a really unique feature of the redesign for Bloodwork, and we're confident you're going to really enjoy that. It's been a blast so far. And then off to the side here, you have slots for each body slot or target slot, like helmet, body, arms, legs. And if you were to inflict break when you hit a particular spot, you slot in an acrylic cube to denote that the armor value in that slot has decreased by 1. And if you inflict break again in the same location, the color of that cube changes. And if you happen to get it to 0 and then break it again, you actually then benefit from additional damage from now hitting an injured, unarmored location. Next, let's take a look at the leader or elite dashboards. These are very similar to the grunt dashboards. It's similar in that it also has a health track for the elite or leader. If there were multiple elites, you could just tack on again another health track. You have the same spot for their profile card with all their statistics, defense die, armor slots. The key differences being that there is the corruption track listed here and a slot for relic cards. Now the corruption track is just a way at a glance that you can track the persistent imminent threat that corruption poses during a mission, and if you allow it to go unchecked at a certain value denoted in the setup rules for each mission, if enough rounds go by and you actually get to this corruption symbol here at the top, all enemies will become corrupted, and you flip their profile card to the opposite side, where we now have new unique artwork for each of them in a corrupted state, where their lethality greatly increases and their behavior changes. And then for elites and leaders, they typically are dealt randomly from a deck specific to them, a relic, one of their individual relics. Now these are unique pieces of gear that when you encounter these enemies throughout the narrative campaign, you have the ability in that window of time that if you're able to pull off, this particular feat during that mission, you can obtain that piece of gear from them. And this gear changes their behavior in a small way during every time you encounter them. And so when you face Gigarat, depending on which piece he gets, he's slightly different every playthrough. So for example, Gigarat's boots, you acquire it by killing the leader with critical hit. Or Kerkrak's Sack of Filth, you acquire it by killing the leader while having 2 fatigue. So you purposely have to fatigue yourself before killing him in order to acquire this. So that's a challenging thing to do. And when he has this equipped, if a mercenary ends their turn adjacent to the leader, they gain 1 fatigue. And so you may just want to park yourself next to him to do that, or purposely fatigue yourself in order to do that. That is the unique opportunity throughout that campaign to obtain that piece of gear. So when you actually do get them, it's like getting that legendary drop in Diablo or Path of Exile, and you're like, yeah, sweet. And this gear forces you to also sort of completely reevaluate the build of your mercenary that you had planned, because all of a sudden you might get something that you're like, oh wow, this completely changes what I want to do. Next, let's take a look at a feature I know everyone's been very excited to take a look at. The examples of the ally dashboards of the solo system for Bloodwork: The Reckoning. This is new since the original campaign, and what you're seeing here is the dashboard that you would slot in the profile card of your allied mercenary. These are autonomous cards that offer streamlined management for multiple mercenaries. So if you wanted to play Bloodwork solo, but you only wanted to control a full mercenary, just one full mercenary to control, and then streamlined control of 3 allies, you have 3 dashboards to do so. If you wanted to field 2 mercenaries in this example and have 2 automated allies, you just take 2 of these dashboards. And similarly, if you want to control 3, then you just take 1. I'll show you examples of how this works, but essentially what you have is a slot for their profile card. On their card, you'll see numbers which relate to the body slots for their different armor values. You'll see tracks to slot in acrylic cubes to show which of their skills you've utilized. And at the bottom is a power track that you just keep track of their power, and you use that power to trigger some of their abilities, as well as a unique feature to the solo mode system and these allies, in that they have a sort of ultimate ability that they can trigger with the generation of power. And then down here, you'll see a number, and the mercenary dashboards all have 1 through 4, and that's just a random targeting feature for grunts and elites and leaders. Occasionally, they will target a random enemy, and if they can't specifically meet some other criteria, and so you roll a d4, and whatever it is, you look at the dashboard, that's the target of their attack that round. So here is the mercenary dashboard. I'm going to just remove 3 and put them off to the side and leave 1. But let's just quickly build one out. I'm going to just zoom out a smidge here for you and use Halbjorn as an example. There we go. And we'll just grab some of his examples of some of his specific cards. All right. And so this is his dashboard. You just quickly slot in his profile dashboard to the right, and you have slots for an accessory and all of the armor slots for the different hit locations or body locations. You have a slot for a main hand weapon, offhand weapon, abilities that you've unlocked and chosen purposefully for your build, as well as your health track, the random tracking number for grunts and enemy attacks, your attack profile slot, tier 1, tier 2, and eventually tier 3 skill cards, and then inventory slots that you unlock throughout the campaign. So let's go ahead and just slot in a few examples of abilities, and then we can talk about all this. So these just go into the appropriate space on the far left. Their position doesn't matter. And next we have examples of starting gear for Halbjorn at the beginning of the tutorial in Bloodwork: The Reckoning. So it's easy to find this in setup because it has his artwork on it. And we'll just slot these into the appropriate location. So main hand weapon, arms, body, offhand hammer, and shield in the offhand. And Halbjorn, one of his unique features, the unique ability denoted on his profile dashboard, is that he has the ability to do a free action to switch weapon during combat. And so every other mercenary would have to use an action to switch to another weapon in their offhand from what they currently have equipped. Halbjorn can do it for free once per round. And then we'll slot in his attack profile card, as well as a couple examples of skill cards. So I'll leave one out for now. But here is his dashboard now set up. You see that he has starting armor up here that has a name, the appropriate symbol for where it goes. Art from Igor, the armor value that is the benefit of having that piece of gear equipped. And it's also numbered for ease of finding it within the deck. And if an enemy inflicts 4 damage and they've struck your chest, you would then use the 2 armor to reduce that to 2. Very quick, very intuitive, easy to figure out how you want to build and what gear you want to use and why. Off to the side, you see the weaponry. So main hand weapon is the runed battle hammer. It requires range 1. It utilizes an attack rate of 1, so it's just telling you to grab 1 die of the appropriate color from whatever attack profile you've selected for an attack. And then for every successful hit, it inflicts 4 base damage plus any other damage from any other source. The shield here, for example, this passively, while it's equipped, increases your base defense of 3 by 1 to 4. So enemies would need a 5+ in order to hit Halbjorn successfully. If he were to weapon switch for free as an action or a spent action, either way, he would lose that benefit, and then enemies would be able to hit him slightly more easily. Abilities are unique things that mercenaries can spend an action to trigger, both inside and out of their turn, which keeps downtime to a minimum because you're constantly looking for opportunities to use some of these abilities that have a green banner background, like defensive aid, which enables Halbjorn to assist an ally when it's not his turn, but that would utilize one of his 3 actions from his next turn. So you got to use them at the right moment when they're going to give you the most benefit. And the others can either be triggered by spending one of your 3 actions to use them, or one of your actions plus 2 power that you've banked. So the stronger they are, typically the more expensive they are to use. And then of course you have your health track and then your attack profile card. There are multiples of these for each class type. And here what you'll see is the iconography for the different die that's used for each attack, the name of the attack, and then the unique flavor of that attack, the advantage that either is always passively a benefit that you gain from choosing that attack profile, or that you actually have to spend 1 power to gain the benefit, but it's always there available to you should you choose to use that and want that benefit. And the way to look at this very simply is that the attack that uses the highest number of face die is always going to be at the top of the attack profile token or card. And then sort of the medium value die is in the middle, and the low value faced die is at the bottom. And so if you need to hit on a 5+, you're more likely to do that with a D12 than you are a D6. So the sort of reliable attack is sort of at the top. The medium sort of reliability attack is in the middle, with a slightly higher chance of inflicting a critical hit, which is always the highest number on any die, and that is an automatic hit. It targets the enemy's weakest body slot or armor slot, and also inflicts additional damage. And so some people may wish to purposefully build their mercenary to go fishing for crits and use some of their skills or passives in these slots to augment their ability to do that successfully here even more likely, and then tailor their gear and abilities and all those things around that. Or they can sort of make their character a little bit more uniformly effective. There are so many options, and when you unlock a skill card, the way you slot that in is if it's a tier 1 card, it has to go in this column, but there's only space for 2 cards, but there are multiple cards for each tier, for each mercenary. And so for Marana is one of my personal favorites for Halbjorn, and I typically, for my playstyle with them, have the skill on the top attack profile, and so this is triggered by the spending of power, and that would augment my most reliable attack. And then the passive with this allows me to lose 2 HP to purposefully gain accuracy +2, making it more likely for me to hit then with my medium attack profile. Had I put for Marana there instead, I would have a completely different passive than what you just saw, and it would be on the top attack profile. And so you really have to be forward thinking as you're looking and unlocking these cards about how you want to play your mercenary, what builds you want to go for, and then sometimes you get something that totally mixes up your plans and you're like, oh, I need to restructure around this one piece of gear, and find new synergies, not just in your character and build, but also how that fits in with the dynamic with your other 3 mercenaries and their synergies together. So that is an example of a fleshed out mercenary dashboard at the early stages of the narrative campaign. You just would have had slightly less abilities. And one thing I didn't note was just showing you, demonstrating the pegboard system. So let's say you have a primary attribute skill point to spend, that would go in the primary attribute skill point tracker, and the first peg that you can put that in is there, which falls beyond the iconography. So Halbjorn now would permanently actually have 23 base health, not 20. And if you do that in the other tracks, you just gain the other benefits. And each mercenary has the same distribution, the same potential benefits, but they're in different distributions. And we also might have some unique things up our sleeves to that effect, which we won't spoil. Okay, next let's take a look at one of the biggest changes to the, as a result of the redesign for Bloodwork, is that the previously offered PVC 3D terrain is no longer associated with this campaign, a Game Found campaign, and instead every pledge of Bloodwork is going to benefit from the immersion offered by 3D terrain at no extra cost. So I have some samples here of 3D terrain created in-house, and I will just put some of this together and show you what that sort of looks like. Just going to pull some of this out. And so it just leads to a much more rich experience when you have that 3D terrain on the board, and we really want everyone to enjoy that. So this is an example of a half wall. It would have 2 other pieces that just slide in to build that, and then it stands nicely. I'm going to move it off to the side and just show an example of one that I left out prior to reassembling this box, just for ease. I'm also going to pull over a small structure, this house, which has art on every side. And terrain like this offers tactical advantages if you're able to fly onto them, if you're someone that has that unique ability, or you can interact with a ladder, for example, to scale them. And being at greater elevation has tactical implications as it improves the range of magical ranged attacks, as well as some of your projectile weapons. And so that's an example of the house, which I'll move off to the side. This is a tile denoting the interior of the home or structure. And so with the redesign, we've also, and with a tile system like this for grid-based map, we now have the flexibility to be able to do some really cool builds where in a mission, the map expands depending on what you choose to do. You may push your luck trying to pursue secondary objectives that might be tucked away in a home like that. And they're not mandatory, but if you go in there, certain things could happen that would likely decrease the likelihood of you coming out on top on a mission. But with risk comes great reward. So, many people are going to pursue those opportunities. So I'm going to move that off to the side. I have an example of a 3D tree here. I'll just move some of these tokens so you can see that better. And then, there's a lot of larger structures as well, altars. There are traps, there are corruption blooms or corruption wells that sit on the board with some degree of 3-dimension, making them just easier to see as well as resolve, because this is the mechanic in which you mitigate the sort of corruption timer. As it's ticking down every round in a mission, you can mitigate that and prevent or delay enemies becoming corrupted by interacting with a corruption bloom and try to cleanse it. And when you flip that over, there's a skill check randomly assigned during setup of the mission, and on success or failure, you may get some additional benefit, like some extra health, a buff, a debuff, and other things. And so sometimes if you try to do that, you'd benefit if successful, but at other times it could cost you dearly if you fail. So it's, again, risk versus reward. I forgot to mention when looking at the, I'm going to pull this back, the Mercenary Dashboard, that because we're looking at the gear that you start with in the tutorial, as you purchase or craft gear, you can intentionally seek out gear sets, meaning you collect 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces of gear or more, and if you have a certain amount of the total of that set, or different amounts of that total set, you may unlock certain tiers of benefit that set awards you. And so some gear has unique sort of stat improvements listed here at the bottom of the card, but others still, especially like gear sets, offer completely new features that can augment your build that otherwise you can't obtain anywhere else. And so it makes gear sets like you would expect in Diablo, Path of Exile, that sort of thing, very attractive and lucrative if you are able to collect all of the set. And it's a really, really fun feature of Bloodwork that we're really fond of, and we hope you like that too. Taking a look at defense style, let's grab a dashboard back again. We already explained this, I'll just demonstrate it. If you had the enemy profile card, you would just see an icon for a particular colored die. And so for their dynamic defense die, you just grab the appropriate color listed and you slot that into the space there. And at the beginning of every round, you would roll that. there's a 2, and so you would add 2 plus their base defense, and that represents the threshold you have to overcome in order to successfully hit them that particular round. The beginning of the next round, you roll it again, now it's 1 higher. And so again, that just helps capture the nature of battle in that, you know, every swing is different and enemies may have better footing, and yours may be slightly less steady round to round. So that's just how we've helped capture that, and it works really, really well. Okay, next, one of my favorite features from the redesign is actually the quality of life cards that we've put into Bloodwork: The Reckoning. I'm just going to pull those out here. And these are cards that I really advocated for after spending quite a bit of time with the old prototype of from the original campaign. Because if you've watched any of those gameplay videos from me, I found that referencing the rulebook for loot tables and iconography and what does that buff do, what does this debuff do, sort of broke immersion and slowed things down. And those were things that I want available at a glance as a player. And so now a lot of quality of life cards have been introduced into Bloodwork: The Reckoning. And so if you have a particular mission where you're fighting Gigarat, or a selection of humanoids and elites, or, you know, whomever the enemy may be, you'll have a loot card for that. And you just pull out the appropriate ones. And on a successful end to a mission, or even partially successful, you'll be told as part of your mission rewards to gain so many rolls on the appropriate loot table. And so you make a roll, and then very quickly, right then and there, at the end of the mission, you know exactly what resources or gear or currency that you have obtained for your efforts. And so those are just simple additions that just make the game run so much more smoothly. And so every pledge will have those, and they have their own unique card back art for easy identification. And I'll move those off to the side. Next, we have some tarot-sized cards for player aids. In terms of new players, just outlining turn order. And we may add some additional things here that actually you, the community, have been suggesting as things you thought would be helpful to add here. And so this just explains turn order very clearly to new players. This also illustrates the actions that you can perform during your turn. And so at a glance, without having to pause to look in the rulebook, you know exactly what you can or can't do. And then examples of debuffs and buffs. These are tokens that are completely reworked in Bloodwork: The Reckoning, featuring unique artwork for each type of buff and debuff. And debuffs also have unique shape to their tokens, making them more readily identifiable. And that is also true of consumables, which are teardrop shaped and also have their own individual artwork. And then we also have a iconography chart for the different attribute tracker bonuses that you can unlock as you allocate your attribute points. So it's not readily apparent on the dashboard, but right here at your fingertips, right on the table, you know exactly what those symbols mean. Okay, now let's take a look at examples of the new solo mode Autonoma cards. So these are examples of the ally profile cards that you would slot into their dashboard. Actually, let me just grab one so that I can do that for you. Here, I'll do that. Boom, just like that. And so now you see the armor values in each slot, what level they are, each skill that you can use an acrylic cube to denote that you've used it. Again, your power track, and down here under this red banner, your sort of like ultimate attack associated to your ally. Now, as you progress through the campaign, so too, and you level up, so too can your allies. They level alongside with you. You can invest resources, currency, and level them up to level 2, level 3, etc. And they gain new skills, more powerful skills. Armor values change, but it just streamlines the overhead for players that want to be able to play that way. In the prototype, we just included level 1, as that's all that's required to use them within the tutorial missions. So we'll move that off to the side. All right, next let's take a look at enemy profile cards using one of the Grunt dashboards as an example. So we'll use the Zalgaran Defender here as an example, but just quickly leafing through a whole bunch of enemy cards. You've seen these before in previous updates, but there are multiple examples here. So you'll see that the card names the enemy, what type of class it is, or what enemy type. It's a grunt, the race human, the class defender. Their base health, their base defense, and then that's a gray die, a gray defense die that you would slot in here. Their armor values for each body location. Their base movement statistic. When they're attacking, they need to be within range 1, and for every successful hit, they inflict 3 offense, and you would roll 3d10 as part of their attack. And if they were to get tactics on the blood deck card, when they successfully hit, then they would also benefit from their sort of like critical hit, which is knockback 2 for this particular enemy. And then when that happens, you as the mercenary that's being targeted have the opportunity to do a resilience check against that to avoid it. But otherwise, if unsuccessful, they will hit you. And knockback can inflict further damage if you're pushed into other mercenaries or enemies or terrain. And then each enemy has some sort of unique attribute to them on the bottom red panel here. Now, on the boss tracker or elite tracker, leader tracker, if you let corruption tick down to the corruption symbol, all enemies become corrupted, and you then use their corrupted state where you have new art, and all of a sudden he went from 17 health to 25. His base defense improved from 1 to 2. His movement improved from 3 to 4. And his offense and die remain the same. And so in some cases, it's their offense that increases greatly, or the number of die, or their armor values actually decrease as their offense increases. So they're squishier, but much more lethal. And sometimes the way that they operate completely changes. So it's really interesting to be able to experience 2 different flavors to the enemies. And so we'll move those off to the side. One more profile card to show you is Verdak, who is a moon shaman, and he is a orc, and he's actually an ally. And so there are missions where there are NPC allies that may join you depending on the choices you make with regards to the factions, your allegiance, the mission setup, outcomes, and they may assist you in fulfilling objectives narratively within the mission, depending on all of those things. So he's just one example of that sort of mechanic that's within the game. I actually just noticed that I missed some of the quality of life improvement cards. So it used to be that the locations that you could visit in town. Here's just a selection of them. This doesn't represent all of them. In the town of Westarch, are located or represented by cards both in the old version of the game and the new redesigned version. However, when they're not yet recovered, you haven't unlocked them, they have sort of a dark, grimy art associated with them, with some sort of narrative flair just below. And as you unlock these, you would make them available to their active side, their recovered state in the town of Westarch. And now, instead of referencing the rule book for what you can do there, it's printed right on the card. And so these are examples of these particular four locations. Okay, next let's take a look at new card types to Bloodwork the Reckoning. And we'll first look at the Fate deck. These ones actually aren't new, but there are other ones of this tarot size that we'll get to. But the Fate deck is what determines initiative each round. And it's separated into 3 sections, and it illustrates who's going to go when. So when you see a horned skull symbol in a section that has a gray background like this, that is the leader or elite activation. So they're going to go first as per the initiative on this card. And then this art portrait section means mercenary activation. And you actually see that there is a optional sort of push your luck opportunity on this card, where if you damage an enemy to remove, you can damage an enemy to remove morale. And so that's a way in which you are kind of interrupting part of what the leader or elite did during their turn. And it says, dispel one and attack the closest enemy. Then all other allies gain morale. And during our activation, for every ally that you successfully damage, you actually get to remove morale from that grunt before they activate. And so some of these cards feature opportunities to sort of interrupt the behavior of the most powerful individual on the board that you're up against. After that opportunity, we then see a helm icon, and that denotes grunt activation, which attackers always go before defenders, and defenders always go before support. And if a grunt can perform the top action with respect to targeting, it will. If it can't do that, it moves down to the next, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next. And if it can't fulfill any of those, then it would just attack the closest target that is within range. And if it can't do that, it'll just move up and attempt to get closer so that on the next turn it's able to do something impactful. And these sections move around on every card. And so we'll see a bunch here where it's the exact same location because I haven't really shuffled them around. Here you see that there's actually no grunt activation on this card. And there's actually the leader, mercenaries, grunts, and then leader again on that one. Here, mercenaries go first, then the leader, then grunts, and so all these positions fluctuate. That was just a poor representation as I didn't shuffle the deck before showing it to you, but basically that is the Fate deck, and it ensures that every counter unfolds and plays differently. So narratively, the boss might do something really cool because of a Fate card, and when that Fate card is drawn early in a mission or later in the mission, completely changes the feel of that mission as you play it this time. And it provides narrative flow within the battle, and so it can be completely different depending on when those cards are drawn. And as these enemy types, factions, races all have distinct personalities, so too do their Fate deck cards have unique tactics that fit their personality and their training and behavior and all of that. So you'll see that Zalgaran Knights as enemies are much more organized as compared to undead or corrupted beings or orcish tribes or goblins, that sort of thing. Another significant quality of life improvement as part of the redesign is that we pulled all events out of the rulebook. No longer do you have to roll on an event table, find the appropriate passage in the rulebook, read that. It just takes a lot of time, it breaks immersion, and so we pulled those right out and made them tarot size cards as well. And we also wanted the distance you travel between mission to mission to get there to actually feel like you've traversed terrain and you've felt the effects of making that travel, and the experiences you feel along the way are actually having an effect on the outcome of your preparation heading into that next mission. It may be beneficial, it may be neutral, it may be negative, depending on what you choose to do. So between mission to mission, every mission has a mission map. And on that map are multiple routes that you can choose from with all kinds of different nodes denoted by symbols like plains, forest, road, as well as chalice events. Now, chalice events are special events that are more robust narratively. They're typically tied to the faction war itself, and those are referenced in the rulebook because they can't be represented on a single tarot card. They're just more robust. But these events are perfect for a tarot-sized card, and they represent chance encounters during your travel. You know, that sort of hunched over elderly woman with the apron that magically has a table full of wares next to her in the middle of nowhere in a dense forest. Rare vendors, anomalies, ambushes, skirmishes with creatures you haven't yet come across. All sorts of things are packed into these cards. And some of them lead to an individual mercenary needing to do a skill check, or the entire party to do a cumulative skill check. Other times they are actual fights against, in this instance, the Hobgoblin Raiders, who have 32 collective health. And as you fight, you resolve this flow until a certain end criteria is met, either success or failure. And if successful, sometimes these cards give you access to rewards that aren't obtainable anywhere else but that event. And so you may strike significant luck by pushing your luck, looking for these opportunities, and get things like rare recipes that you otherwise wouldn't have found, or specific loot that truly is only tied to one of these cards. So it just leads to that wow factor when you actually get something like that, just like when you get that legendary drop in Diablo or Path of Exile. And they all feature Igor's fantastic art and rich, small narrative that just keeps you immersed during the travel phase and just lends to a really, really great system that we're proud of. So confident you will really enjoy that experience. The resource deck is essentially the deck where when you successfully complete a mission or partially complete a mission, you will be given the opportunity to roll on those loot tables. And this is simply the deck that you pull those rewards from. So you have resources like magic dust, currency, gold, resources like iron, copper, leather hides, gems, goblin heads from every grunt that you vanquish during a mission, animal bits, corruption blooms that you have successfully cleansed during a mission, wood, copper, animal bit, like the list goes on. And so these are the currency or resources that you use to buy new gear, craft gear, etc. in town. Starting equipment in the tutorial for Bloodwork is all easily found for each mercenary because their starting equipment features their unique art. And I already showed you examples of Halbjorn's, but there's a few other mercenaries that we'll show examples of. And that just, you flip that over and you just see the starting equipment that each of them gain at the beginning of the tutorial. Depending on the mission and what's available to interact with within the map, the tiles that are laid out. And this deck here is an example of that, and it's just basic gear, but some of them have unique things that are a slight bump above some of the starting gear in the tutorial. And then there are multiple decks of various tiers or rarity of gear that are utilized throughout the duration of the campaign. And obviously higher rarity comes with higher armor values or stronger bonuses, or potentially allows you to unlock the use of a unique ability or skill you otherwise couldn't obtain anywhere else that completely changes how you want to play your character. And you'll see examples of gear here. And when you flip these over, the opposite side just shows you how they can be crafted. And in this case, these are all recipes or gear that is not typically purchased, because you would see a gold value on the back. These ones are crafted. And I'll show you an example of those that are purchasable as opposed to crafted only. Some of the examples I alluded to of unique pieces of equipment that you can only obtain as a result of being dealt a lucky draw on your travels from the path you've chosen on the mission maps, and then successfully meeting some criteria on that card that rewards you with a unique piece of gear that wasn't obtainable anywhere else. And so that's one of those things that helps build in those like wow moments when you get this really cool like huge sword or some corrupted relic that has a negative but very positive flavor to it. And then there are relics that you see on the elites and bosses or leaders, which are pieces of gear, one of which gets randomly dealt to most of them depending on mission setup. And each one has a sort of condition that you can work towards meeting in order to obtain it from that leader when you defeat them. So for example, Gigarat's boots, you acquire it by killing the leader with critical hit. Or Kerkrak's sack of filth, you acquire it by killing the leader while having 2 fatigue. So you purposely have to fatigue yourself before killing him in order to acquire this. So that's a challenging thing to do. And when he has this equipped, if a mercenary ends their turn adjacent to the leader, they gain 1 fatigue. And so you may just want to park yourself next to him to do that, or purposely fatigue yourself in order to do that. And then once you acquire it, you then have this unique relic that may be permanent or transient and only have so many uses before it's permanently discarded. And each of these generally make the leader behave slightly differently. So here are examples of equipment where you can either craft them or purchase them for a monetary value, a gold value. And they all have different requirements. That's actually one of the event cards. I'll put that back over here. And so without spoiling the equipment, although we've showcased a lot of it in prior updates, I'll just show you this side. But we have heaps of gear sets, all with unique things that they allow your mercenary to do. The blood deck is the targeting system after you've successfully hit an enemy or they successfully have hit you. And it's got 3 sections. The top section here, when you draw this after hitting an enemy, shows where you are going to hit them, in this case their head. And if you had a critical strike, you would actually add 1 damage, that's that symbol, and for every one of those symbols you get 1 additional critical damage to your attack, and inflict defense down on that enemy. So that's really powerful. Sometimes that inflict defense down is like accuracy +1 up here, and you gain that, so your accuracy increases. And so some of these cards feature those sort of things. And then when this card is drawn on a grunt activation after hitting you, you use the bottom section to see where they've targeted you. And if they were to get, let me just find an example of tactics. So you can see different crit damage. Here they've actually inflicted disarm to you. Let's see, come on there. So here's an example of a tactics card. So this is sort of the equivalent of enemy critical hits. When they have that exclamation mark, boom, tactics. You then look at their profile card, which shows that they would benefit from, in this case here, knockdown, and you would have to try to do a resilience check against that. So that's when they get some additional benefit. So that is the blood deck, and it is a really good system. I think it's a really good system, and I think you'll like it as well. Next we have the mood cards, and I'm just going to pull the injuries out. Now, mood cards are a awesome system within Bloodwork. I'm going to show you a bunch of examples here, but basically they are a engine in which we are able to allow the travel, your journey, everything that you succumb to or overcome, your achievements lead to changes in the emotional and sort of spiritual state of your mercenaries, and that has lasting effects. And these cards can either be discarded based on the verbiage that's denoted at the bottom if they instruct you to when you use them, or they can't be discarded until a new mood card is gained replacing it. But there's various moods: fear, determination, serenity, fellowship, sorrow, anger, apathy, guilt, envy. Envy's kind of cool. It says lose 1 power, so power you've gained as your mercenary, whenever an ally rolls a critical. So you're basically envious of your fellow players at the table or your allies when they're putting out critical hits. You're envious of their prowess, and you actually lose your power. And then you aren't able to trigger some of the things you would want to trigger using that. And then so some of these are neutral, some of these are negative, and some of these are positive. But it leads to a really, really cool system that just shows how the travel and everything you experience weighs on your mercenaries and has lasting effects. And then finally we have the injury deck, which is a card a mercenary would draw after being killed in battle. And so when their health is reduced to 0, essentially. If you had 3 or more health before being killed, you actually get to do a cheat death check or roll where you would succeed on a 10. And if that happens, you actually just stay alive, but with 1 HP remaining. And if you were killed with 2 or less HP, before the attack hit you, then you can't cheat death. But there are ways in which you can be revived on the battlefield, like a mercenary can stand adjacent to you, spend 2 of their actions, and you can be revived to half of your base health. But again, you then instantly have an injury that makes you less effective in combat. I mean, if you take a deep wound to your shield arm, you're not going to be able to hoist that effectively, and your defense may be decreased. Or if you took an injury to your leg, your speed and movement decreases. If you have a heavy injury, all tests you attempt to succeed on become a little bit more challenging. If you have a heavy injury, your accuracy decreases. There are so many effects, like permanent bleed. You can't do a critical hit, etc. So all of these have profound impacts, and also are just another layer to how we capture the ebb and flow of battle and the realities of battle. All right, we're getting very close to the end here. Here are all of the new tokens in Bloodwork. We showed you symbols of these on the quality of life token cards, but here they are in the flesh. The consumables have a teardrop shape and iconography or artwork to easily identify them. And on the reverse side, you have their effect. Life elixir, HP +5. Free action, consume that when you have it on your mercenary, boom, your health goes up, and then you discard it. There are some other tokens like this, which are used as objective tokens on a mission map setup. And that's consumables. We then have examples of debuffs, which have, it's a circle token, but with all these little chinks. And that just sort of shows like the corrosive nature of a debuff to your effectiveness. So fatigue, and then just artwork on the opposite side to match. So it just tells you what they are, and again, you have your reference cards right there on the table that you already pulled out. And then here you have examples of buffs, same sort of idea. So, and lastly, we'll end with just a couple examples of the miniatures. We'll feature, let's feature Evanara, as she's the early bird reward. And so I don't have her glued on the base here, just because it's much more fun to paint a base when it's not yet glued on. But let's show you her. I'll zoom in. So she's a halfling rogue, and almost kind of like has a unique fae or fairy flair to her, and in that she also actually has wings on the back, similar to that of a wasp or bee, something of that nature. She's a really cool sculpt. So I'll move her off to the side, and then show you an example of a leader. Here we have Kerkrak, who is the final mission you may see reviewers play in the prototype. And he is much larger in comparison. Oh, there we go. And he's just a big chunky boy. And narratively, for him, he's a big, fat, hulking orc, and a lot of his behavior during a mission is bent around the fact that he is always hungry, and if you don't prevent him from eating from the roasted pig on a spit that he and his troop are all collected around, he's going to get well fed. And when he's more well fed, he's harder to damage. He puts out more damage. He inspires his allies. There's all sorts of things. And so it's just interesting how we've tied behavior, narrative into the mission, into the sculpt, and into like the personality of each of these named elites and leaders that you will come across. So those are just an example of 2 minis that are within the prototype. There's heaps, and we hope you look forward to footage from our reviewers. Thanks again, guys, and hope you look forward to the next update.